Good evening and welcome to Story Hour. I'm tonight's host, Laura Blackwell. My co-host, Daniel Marcus, started Story Hour at the beginning of a shelter-in-place order to help us connect to one another with stories, even as we protect one another with distance. In California, we're now required to wear masks outside our homes, so the best way to see each other's faces is still here, through our screens. Welcome back to those returning, and welcome to those joining us for the first time. This week's format is the same: two writers, about 30 minutes each, no Q&A, and a short PSA for a nonprofit or two. You can keep up to date about upcoming author appearances at storyhour2020.com and see programs you may have missed at the Story Hour page on Facebook. If you are fortunate enough to help others during this time, please consider a donation to the Southern Poverty Law Center. The Southern Poverty Law Center is dedicated to fighting hate and bigotry and to seeking justice for the most vulnerable members of our society. Using litigation, education, and other forms of advocacy, the SPLC works toward the day when the ideals of equal justice and equal opportunity will be a reality. SPLcenter.org. Another excellent organization to support is the Natural Resources Defense Council. NRDC works to safeguard the earth, its people, its plants and animals, and the natural systems upon which all life depends. NRDC combines the power of more than 3 million members and online activists with the expertise of some 700 scientists, lawyers, and policy advocates across the globe to ensure the rights of all people to the air, the water, and the wild. You can find NRDC at www.nrdc.com. If you are here with us on Zoom, please mute your mic now. Feel free to leave your camera on because it can be quite lovely for our readers to see their distant audience, and chime in on the text chat if you like. If you are joining us on Facebook, thank you, but please understand that we are not seeing your messages during the readings. We have two readers tonight. We have Dawn Vogel and we have A.T. Greenblatt. So let's start with A.T. Greenblatt. I understand that you're on in a less favorable time zone. So let's start with you. A.T. Greenblatt is a mechanical engineer by day and a writer by night. She lives in Philadelphia, where she's known to frequently subject her friends to various cooking and home brewing experiments. That doesn't sound so bad. She is a graduate of Viable Paradise 16 and Clarion West 2017. Her work has won a Nebula Award, congratulations, and has been in multiple years' best anthologies, and has appeared in Uncanny, Beneath the Skies, and Clark's World, as well as many other fine publications. You can find her online at atgreenblatt.com and on Twitter at Greenblatt. I like the way that lines up when you read it out loud.
Thanks. Yeah, it just sounds funny when you have to actually say it.
It's kind of fun. I like it. So, what are you reading for us tonight?
So I have a story that I am trying to rewrite, and I think it's almost there, but we're gonna find out.
Oh.
So I think it'll be a good exercise to read it out loud. Let's see how it sounds too. So it's called "Memory of a Memory is a Spirit." We'll see if the title stays the same when it gets out in the world, but we'll find out. Anyway, yeah, so I'm A.T. Greenblatt. Thanks for having me, and here's my story. After Sume left home in ruins, there was no place left to go except back to the island she abandoned years ago. Except when her boat scraped against the shallows, she found the island's dock slumped for modern disuse. And the path leading from the docks was smothered by vines and ferns, so overgrown it was almost invisible. The stink of stagnant water and algae assaulted her. The emptiness, the neglect confirmed her worst fears. She was the first person to set foot on the island in 20 years. Well, fuck, she said. Slinging the bag full of her mainland things over one shoulder, Sume began to walk the leaf-bound path towards the havens. She didn't even make it 10 steps before a vine snaked around her pant leg, trying to hold her back. She shook her ankle free and exhaled loudly. This was why people on the mainland thought the island was full of restless ghosts. Not quite, she say, always trying to correct them. Not ghosts, and they're just lonely. She knew this because 20 years ago she was the island's caretaker. Only Reshi, her love, believed her though. But she didn't explain that everything on the island was fucking possessed or magical, even the plants, which were moving and clinging and curling around her calves like needy cats. This is not okay, she said. She dropped her travel bag, got down on her knees, and began uprooting plants, scowling at herself because she didn't even make it to the first haven before she lapsed into old habits. At first, they resisted. The roots were deep and the ferns kept wrapping the leaves around her wrist and tugging her back. But Sume wasn't having any of this shit. Carefully, she replanted every stubborn vine and delicate shoot on the edge of the path she was clearing. What if we have visitors? She asked, then laughed bitterly. If anyone bothered visiting the island, maybe she wouldn't be in this mess. At first, she worked in peace, though the hairs on her arms stood straight up, and the chilly breeze whispered against the back of her neck, despite the rising humidity. That's how she knew the island spirits were watching her, silent and pissed. She couldn't blame them. 20 years was a long time to be gone. At first, her work went well, the white stone path slowly revealing itself, until it didn't. Closer to the havens, the plants grew bolder. Sume was rehoming a particularly spiky shrub when the greenery retaliated. They twisted around her arms, pulled her down, jabbed her with their thorns. They whispered, "Why did you come back?" "Let go," she said through clenched teeth, struggling to one knee. The plants yanked her back down, clinging, wrapping, squeezing. She couldn't move. Her vision was shades of green. Panic swelled up in her chest, and for one horrifying moment, Sume couldn't breathe. Then she remembered. Everything on the island was haunted or magical, including the caretakers. And trapped deep in the angry greenery, Sume's fingers began to remember their tricks. She didn't even realize it at first, the rhythm and the beat she began tapping out against the stems. Index fingers first, then thumbs, then pinkies, until all 10 of her digits were drumming to a half-remembered song. Slowly, the plants around her began to sway, as if they could hear that memory of a song. Slowly, they loosened their thorny grips, then drew back. She stood up, tapping on her thighs. Soon, Sume was scooping up out-of-bound plants, whistling when she couldn't drum her fingers. The treacherous ferns hastily buried themselves back into the earth at the edge of the path, as soon as she let go. The thistles and ivy scurried away as soon as her fingers touched them. "That's right," she said, as she picked up her travel bag. Move your ass plants. I'm back." She took a step forward, and the greenery shrank away from her, like a wave on a shore, leaving the white stone path clear and straight. She smiled. Progress. Except the chilly breeze whispered on her neck again. The spirits were still angry. "Yeah, figured you wouldn't forgive me that fast," she muttered. She had a house on the mainland, but she ruined it spectacularly. And now she couldn't go back. Now she needed to win back the island she abandoned long ago. So she squared her shoulders, steadied her nerves, and headed back down the path towards the haven, cutting the foliage like a boat on undisturbed water. The first haven looked depressed. Sume knew it was a dumb thing to think about a bunch of ancient stones piled around a perfectly square door. But the wood fit. Moss blanketed stones, knotty and long, like hair would do for a cut. The squat structure made her think of the old man sitting hunched on a soup, his round belly peeking out from under his shirt, who always waved at her when she walked by. Before Sume left the mainland, he had been her neighbor, and she would wave back. A smile tugging her lips. She hadn't realized how much she missed the Spirit's Haven and its ridiculous square door. It took all of her self-control, not to run up to it like an old friend, because she could feel the spirits watching, the intensity of their unseen gaze making all the fine hairs stand straight up like in static shock. She took one slow, cautious step towards the haven. Nothing moved. Not even the moss swayed in the wind. So she took another. Stillness still. Eventually, she was at the door. Part of her knew this was too easy. The spirit's icy breeze that had been haunting her since she returned all but hissed the silent judgment. But she was desperate for forgiveness. She wanted to be accepted back like an old friend. Missed you too, she whispered, her palms on the knob. Inside, the haven wasn't like it used to be. 20 years ago, it brimmed with life and history. She'd step in and be swept up by the music, the stories, the smell of food. There'd be creatures from its legends, horses with fish scales and dogs with clocks in the belly, sprawled out on the carpets and curled up in nooks. Now, there was only a few stray hairs and iridescent scales on the floor. Now, there was only whispers of the lost language, the ones that sounded like water running over stones. Even the music that flooded with joy was subdued. Still, she recognized the song, remembering it now. It was the one she tapped and whistled to the plants on her way here. Sume had lived in many, many different places on the mainland, but one thing was always the same. People whispered about this island and its haunting ghosts with fear. And she calmly explained to friends, Reshi, anyone really, that the spirits on the island were not the restless, unhappy dead. They were the memories of entire cultures that moved on, a haven for each of them. The arts and words and customs that made them living, vibrant things among the people they once belonged to. Sume smiled, leaning against the doorway. Just the murmurs of the memories of the spirit filled her with happiness. She stepped inside the haven. That's when everything moved. Carpets rolled shut, music scared off key, and suddenly a hushed singers were yelling, and 1,000 invisible hands were on her, shoving. I'm sorry, she shouted, even as she was being pushed out, out, out. I'm so sorry. Her apologies were useless, though. The haven's door slammed shut, inches from her nose. Her breath hitched around the deep ache under her breastbone, where the grief over this, over everything that brought her back to the island, swelled up like a wave. She used to spend countless hours in this haven. It had been her favorite one. Please, I don't belong anywhere else, she whispered, resting her forehead against the rough wood of the door. I've tried. The haven's door refused to budge. As a counter-argument, or maybe a counter-hope, Sume threw herself into restoring the island, becoming the good taker she was supposed to be. You need me too, she said to the spirits. Just look at yourself. The spirits didn't respond. Her papa had taught her to be ready for visitors. He said that once the island was full of them, that the spirits would hum with excitement when guests arrived. Back when people didn't think of this island as a haunted, frightening place. Back when people weren't so afraid of other histories and cultures. That was before something changed. Something she spent 20 years trying to understand and repair. And failed. Now, it looked like she and the island would be lonely together. But caretaker habits were fucking hard to break. She started with the path. On the island, there were 15 miles of white pebble trails, or 32 key, or 12 and a half traces, depending. Her last home used miles. Musume lived on many places in the mainland and had gotten quick at doing conversions in her head. She liked numbers. She hadn't known that about herself until she left. It took most of a week to clear the path. They were drowning in the sea of foliage, and the work was slow but fruitful. Occasionally she ran into a patch of ferns that was as stubborn as she was. Occasionally the spirits would put obstacles in the way. She'd been walking down the path, and suddenly there'd be a stack of wooden boards, or a pile of soggy blankets, or a pyramid of paint pillars full and teetering. Things that weren't there a day or hour or minutes before. Once, the spirit sent a dog, gray as mist, to block her way. It barked and danced in place. And Sume halted, hesitated. Dogs used to terrify her. She approached carefully, rolling a few berries she picked on a walk towards the mist dog. The first friend she ever made on the mainland laughed at her fear and taught her how to read their body language, how to befriend them. The dog sniffed at the berry. Carefully, it picked it up like a precious treasure and trotted away before anyone could make it give it back. Sume laughed. After that, the spirits didn't pull any more of that shit. The chilly breeze at her back stayed annoying and consistent, but as the days passed, it felt warmer. Or maybe she was just getting used to it. She cared for the havens next. She counted 76 spirit havens on the island, 4 more than when she left. The new ones were only the size of mushrooms or house cats. A handful of pebbles clustered around the splinter of a door. But that was how all havens began. They would grow. She cleaned the moss from the stones and scrubbed the doors and made signs from the boards and paint they left in her way. She didn't know what the actual names were, so she wrote descriptions for each one, like, "This haven has seashells and sea monsters. Food has notes of coconut." She imagined the island as a museum, which pleased her. She hadn't even known what a museum was until she left. Reggie had taken her to her first one, and she fell in love because they reminded her of the island. When she finished caring and curating, Sume tried the haven's doors, one by one, hoping desperately someone would let her in. But they were locked and locked again. The 56th haven she tried had a pale blue door, like a mirror shard among the stones. Its sign said, "Full of color, textile arts, and loud music." It opened a crack as she approached, and the breeze at her back turned tepid. With her heart in her throat and all her hopes in her chest, Sume pushed against the door. It didn't move. "Fuck you," she seethed. Frustration, exhaustion, disappointment roiled up inside her. You didn't have to be alone all this time. She pushed against the door again, but got nothing except a whiff of cumin and a throb of her drumline. "Why did you come back?" the breeze at her back whispered. She didn't ask, "Why didn't you snare someone else as a caretaker? Why wouldn't you let me go? What will happen to us?" Instead, she snapped, "What the hell do you want with me? What the hell do you want me to do?" The spirits didn't answer, but the breeze became biting and she felt their hurting hearts. Or maybe that was her own. After that, Sume began to do things for herself. Restless and frustrated and stuck, she began building a home by the shore. Rebuilding, rather. Her old one had a good foundation, and after 20 years of neglect, the roof was on the verge of collapse and the walls water stained green. It was just easier to pull down the framework and start over, as if she arrived on the island as a half-drowned sailor. "I knew that sailor," she said as she made the shingles for the roof. Reggie had washed up on shore one evening and introduced himself with a shy smile. Sume was the island's sole caretaker then, Papa being only a memory now. They were the first person she had seen in 15 years. She rebuilt her home in a day. This was a bit of caretaker magic she liked best, the way she could take driftwood and rocks and detritus and transform them into workable materials, the way she could dance her fingers over them and they would slide into place, hold together like natural attraction. This was the only piece of caretaker magic she used on the mainland. Every time she moved, she built a new house. Except she was careful to drag out the process, taking weeks instead of hours. Her friends and neighbors accepted that she was a bit odd, that once she lived on a haunted island, but what she was doing here would have terrified them. Maybe that's why no one's come, she thought bitterly, as she took pebbles and metamorphosed them into slates for the roof. She built a two-room cottage with sea glass windows facing west towards the water and east towards the havens. She took a handful of things she decided to save from her old life and put them on the sills and shelves. Patchwork hats, hand-thrown clay mugs, museum brochures with gallery maps, Eshi's earrings. A souvenir from every place she lived on the mainland, 20 in all. Like my own museum, she said, but wondered if it was more like a haven. The next morning, she found the side of her new house, the spirit's message. The green paint still dripping. What's the museum? Go away, she said. I'm busy. She was pleased with her home at first, but after a week it felt too bright, too empty, too unimaginative. So she carried out all the things she wished to save, and with a few flicks of her fingers and wrists, pulled the whole thing down. This was also a bit of caretaker magic, one that she didn't relish, but had its uses. She saw the Miss Dog watching among the ferns where the beach ended. A museum is where people collect valuable things they want to remember, she said. That afternoon, she began rebuilding a new house on the foundations, this time with less windows and more angles. Why did you leave? Was spelled out in the grains of the boards she was building. Because I wanted to know why visitors stopped coming here, she said. Because I was lonely, she didn't say. Because I missed Reshi and wanted to see them more often. 2 mornings later, she stepped out of the house to find a message scrawled in the sand. Will you tell us about the mainland? Sume rolled her eyes. But as she fished from the dock, she told the spirits about the scent of oven hot sourdough and peaches so sweet they made her teeth ache when she worked as a farmhand in one town. About the laughter and good-natured teasing and the bone-deep tiredness when she worked in a crew of fisherwomen. How each new place she lived, she made friends, many of them a long way from home too. How her friends would tell about their homes, and she would tell them about the havens. How, no matter where she went, Reshi would come find her when the boat came to port. Most of the time I was happy, she made to spirits. Those memories made her smile. But they also reminded her of the things she was fighting hard to forget. Fighting and failing. At night, those memories came rushing in, swallowing all the air in her bedroom. 2 days later, Sume pulled down her house and made a new one with higher ceilings. Why did you leave? Why did you come alone? The message was written in ash above the fireplace. The mainland was welcoming, Sume said, avoiding the second question. Until it wasn't anymore. She left to find out why people feared the islands, but didn't see when the irrational fear grew up around her. Or maybe she did see, but didn't want to. The slurs, the declining business, the politicians becoming bolder, more hateful. She reasoned that it was just a minority viewpoint, that it wouldn't affect her. And then she came home one day and saw the windows of a house broken and the words, Go the fuck home, foreigner, slashed on her door. The old man, her neighbor, sitting on a stoop, looked sympathetic, but said nothing. Did nothing. I destroyed that house, Sume said. With 2 12s on my wrists, it was hella stupid to let people see that bit of caretaker magic, but I was so angry, you know? I thought some of my friends would come visit me, but what she didn't say was that when she came back to the island, she hoped. She had been restoring the island for a month, and hers was the only boat in dock. As days passed, she hoped less and worried more. Were they okay? Or were they frightened of her too? She had no way of knowing. She ignored the spirit's other questions that followed her around like puppies as she moved around the house for the rest of the day. As she was lying down in bed, she saw the question on the ceiling, flickering in her lantern light. What happened to your sailor, Reshi? Sume pulled the blankets closer around her. I don't know. I haven't heard from them in months. She was silent for a long moment. Gathering up her courage, she asked, Do you forgive me for leaving? Do you forgive me for leaving? The words faded from the woodwork. Sume held her breath. A moment later, new ones gathered in form. We are lonely, caretaker, but we still need time. Yeah, she said, understanding intimately the pain of being abandoned. She blew out the light. After Sume became caretaker of the island again, she did all she could do to make the spirits happy, to make herself content. Then she became depressed. Most days she sat on the dock, looking out over the water. The spirits were always close now, the presence of warm breath at her back. Most of the havens left their door ajar, so she could sit in the doorway. It wasn't the same as being surrounded by the culture that valued art above words, or the one that used words for the art. She could only catch whiffs of honey roasted yams, or the music that sounded like a pulse, or glimpses of the lavender stags and 10-eyed elephant. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was a start. At least you don't think I don't belong here, she said. She had resigned herself to being lonely, the lonely caretaker, on an island full of restless spirits. The caretaker who tried to teach people differently and failed. Perhaps that's why she wasn't expecting to find Vashti on the shore one morning, 6 weeks after she destroyed her last home on the mainland. They came rushing up from the dock, relief, happiness, worry, doubt, making a muddy mix of expressions on their face. Wow, she said, you're here. She convinced herself that Vashti wasn't going to find her again. A silence stretched between them for a minute. Then two. I'm so sorry, they said, finally. Yeah, it took me so long. But I wasn't allowed on the mainland. They bit their lip, rubbed their arms. Did you get my message? Sume shook her head. Fuck, the sailor said. The expression was devastating, and Sume forgave him right on the spot. Well, I got yours. What message? Reshi waved a hand towards the mainland. Your house. How you brought it down? It started a bunch of stories, and I thought, oh, that, she said. Suddenly she was running towards them, wrapping her sailor up in her arms. I tried to fix things. It didn't work, she whispered. The tears dripped down her nose and into Reshi's head. I know, they said into her ear, hugging her back close and tightly. She felt Reshi's hitching breath on her neck. I invited some people like us, who don't have a home anymore. Sumi let go. What? Is that okay? Beshi asked. They worried the lip. You always said the island was meant for visitors. Yeah, I did, she said. Oh, good, 'cause, they'll be here soon. Beshi pointed towards the mainland. Sumi followed the finger, and her breath caught. All across the lake, there were dozens of rowboats and rafts, with dozens of little guide lights swaying on their prow. Oh, she said. Is this okay? Beshi asked again, all worried and nervous. Around them, the spirits began to hum with excitement. Sume swore her hair was curling from their vibrations, the sun and warmth. The spirits joy ran counterpoint to her own racing heart. Yeah, that's okay, she said. In the approaching glow of the guide lights, she could just make out the outline of the visitors' faces. And that's what I got.
I would say what you've got is definitely a story.
Thank you.
That was really lovely. Thank you.
That was lovely. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
It is our pleasure. And it is also our pleasure that we have Dawn Vogel here tonight. So Dawn Vogel's academic background is in history, so it's not surprising that much of her fiction is set in earlier times. By day, she edits reports for historians and archaeologists. That sounds really fun. In her alleged spare time, she runs a craft business, co-runs a small press, and tries to find time for writing. Her steampunk series, Brass and Glass, is published by DEFCON 1 Publishing. She is a member of Broad Universe, Codex Writers, and SFWA. She lives in Seattle with her awesome husband and fellow author, Jeremy Zimmerman, and their herd of cats. Welcome, Dawn. What do you have for us tonight?
So a lot of what I write is fantasy, which means, of course, the story that I picked out tonight is sci-fi. So the Young Explorer's Adventure Guide has 6 volumes that have come out. I've been lucky enough to be in volumes 4 through 6. And the story that I have in this one, which came out this past December, is called Fixer Upper. It's a little post-apocalyptic sci-fi-ish story. Kieran's favorite place was her apartment, lying on her bed with her eyes shut, imagining that she was in a space capsule instead of the long, narrow room. The walls were thick enough to drown out most of the sound from the complex, except when someone climbed the ladder to her floor and knocked on her door. What? She snarled, annoyed to have her daydream interrupted. It's Shyama, her youngest sister replied. Ma'am needs us. For what? She didn't say, but she said to collect you and Jody. Karen sighed. All right, I'll be right down. She rose from her mattress, ran a hair through her disheveled short hair, which served only to make it more of a mess, and located her shoes. She checked the tread on one sole as she donned the other one. The repurposed strips of bicycle tire she used to keep her thin-soled shoes from slipping on the ladder rungs were wearing down. She'd need to trade for new ones soon, if there were any more tire treads to be had. It was either that or climb the ladder barefoot, but Ma'am hated it when she did that, saying it was uncivilized. As if living in an apartment complex constructed out of repurposed shipping containers was civilized. Ma'am hated almost everything that Kieran did when it came down to it. Jody already stood outside of Ma'am's apartment, hands on her hips, long braids swaying as she shook her head at Kieran. Slowpoke, she muttered when Kieran was near enough to hear her. Before Kieran could respond, Ma'am opened her door. Shyama had slipped up beside her older sisters at some point when Kieran wasn't paying attention. Shyama was small and lithe, always surprising people by suddenly being in their presence. Stepping onto her porch, Ma'am said, Lena passed away in her sleep last night. The boys took her body down to the burning river first thing this morning. I need to get her apartment cleaned out and leased today. So fast? Kieran asked. Normally they would wait a few days, out of respect for the recently deceased. Today, Ma'am repeated. She's got no family coming to collect her things, and we can't afford keeping vacancies. We already got too many mouths living here. Kieran nodded, already thinking about the various people she knew who might want and be able to afford one of the apartments here. Living in a private space was expensive enough that few could afford it. If her mother hadn't been the owner of these apartments, Kieran would be living in one of the undercity communities, pressed in amongst hundreds of bodies in a shared space. Though Ma'am didn't come out and say it, Kieran and her sisters were among those too many mouths living in the complex, though they earned their keep by running errands, cleaning, and cooking. Ma'am needed paying renters, ones who had actual tradable goods or foodstuffs, if she was to keep providing the meals portion of the lease terms. Kieran's mind wandered away from the practicalities of a new tenant. She'd be unlikely to poach any tenants from other complexes. If there'd been any disruptions that had forced someone out, she'd already know about it. She'd have to go to the Undercity to see if there was anyone there who'd come into means recently, who wanted out of communal living and into a place of their own. And if she was going to the Undercity, she might get a chance to check in with the recruiter from Anvation, but she'd have to move quickly. Ground floor, Ma'am said. Find someone who needs it. With a sigh, Kieran reevaluated the names she'd already picked out as possibilities. Finding someone who needed an accessible apartment was far harder than finding someone who just needed any old apartment. This meant less time to do what she liked in the Undercity. Jody, you go with Kieran. Take the wagon with anything you can think you can trade out of Lena's apartment. We need about 60 meters of copper pipe and more ceramic bowls. Kieran's head jerked up. With Jody in tow, it nearly guaranteed that any hopes she had of speaking with the recruiter today would be shot. I don't want to bring her in that slow wagon with me. Ma'am raised one eyebrow in response. Well, you're going to, and you're going to stick together. She looked between her eldest and middle daughter. I don't want to hear from either of you that the other one went off to do their own thing. You go to the Undercity, you trade Lena's stuff, you find me a tenant, you come back. Today. Kieran gritted her teeth. She was tired of being Ma'am's errand girl, which was the whole point of talking to the recruiter. The only way out from under Ma'am's thumb was to leave the planet, and Anvation was the only means to that end. Of course, ma'am, Jody said, her voice pleasant and measured, the polar opposite of how Kieran felt. Kieran could only nod at Ma'am, knowing any words she uttered would betray her. When the bombs fell, they leveled the buildings and left few survivors. Then the rubble pushed half the city into the bay, and there were even fewer left alive. No one could quite explain how the stacks of storage containers had remained standing, nor how the tunnels that honeycombed the city had not collapsed. But those became the places where people lived. Those who had the means to hold a swath of the storage containers converted them into apartment complexes, with private spaces for individuals or families, but communal dining areas and bathrooms, since using the storage containers for much more than sleeping quarters had proved disastrous. People who did not get a piece of the housing pie could rent for exorbitant barter expectations from their landlords. If they could not manage that, they wound up in the Undercity, where no one held on to much of anything for long. Kieran knew that she and her family had been lucky. Her uncles and cousins made up Ma'am's security force, and Ma'am ran a tight ship. Tenants paid their rent on time, or they left. In return, Ma'am and her family kept the renters fed, clean, and safe from the roving bands that made neither a complex nor the Undercity their home. Anvation was an anomaly, a conglomerate of scientists who had banded together in the hopes of getting the human race to escape the dying Earth for some other planet. Kieran suspected they intended to colonize Mars. She was ready to sign on. She didn't have much in the way of technical know-how, but she'd let them shoot her into space at the earliest opportunity. Anything to get off this rock. Now she just had to convince the recruiter that she was really ready to go. And to do that, she'd have to get rid of Jody and her stupid wagon. As they made their way toward the Undercity, they walked in silence, Jody pulling her wagon with mismatched wheels. She'd managed to pair wheels of almost the same size on both sides of the back of the wagon and smaller, almost matched wheels at the front of the wagon. But it still had a hitch in the way it rolled. Sometimes Jody had to stop and straighten out one wheel or another. During one of their stops, Jody looked at Kieran from beneath her thick bangs. How long will it take you to find a new tenant? Kieran shrugged. Most of the day. It wasn't that much of an exaggeration if she needed to find someone who met Ma'am's exacting specifications. Noticing the way Jody perked up at her answer, Kieran asked, how long will it take you to make your trades? About the same, I'd wager. A faint smile broke across Kieran's face. So it wouldn't be very productive for us to stick together all day, would it? We'd only be able to complete one of Mam's tasks. Agreed, Jody said. Kieran understood what her sister wanted to say, but as their mother's favorite, Jody would never do so. It was up to Kieran to make the suggestion. We should split up then. And we don't need to tell Mam, now do we? She'd be quite cross if she found out. Exactly. Agreed? Agreed. Kieran smiled more broadly now. Then if you've got the wagon under control, I'm going to hurry ahead. I'll meet you at the lighthouse ruins before the bell signals the night market. Kieran had spoken with 5 people she thought might be able to rent the vacant apartment, but none of them had the means to do it, not unless she allowed them to sign a lease for lower than Mam's usual asking price. If any of the potential tenants had a way to bring in foodstuffs for their portion of the rent, she might have been able to cut them a deal without risking Mam's ire. But none of them had offered that valuable commodity as part of their barter arrangement. She had one last person to visit, an older woman named Marky, who was raising 2 young grandchildren, and she hoped they'd be able to come to an agreement quickly. As it was, she might only get half an hour to speak with the Anvation recruiter, and she hardly thought that would be sufficient to sign the paperwork. Marky's grandchildren were play fighting with sticks in the hallway that led to where their grandmother sat knitting. Kieran tried to step nearer to the old woman, but every advance she made was thwarted by the ever-widening circle of the stick fight. With a deep sigh, she called out to Marky, "Are you looking for an apartment?" Marky looked up. "Your mam got one? Ground floor?" Kieran nodded. "Lena passed away. It'll be ready tomorrow, if you can make the rent." "I got woolens aplenty, and I'll take in mending, sewing, whatever folks have. I'm training the children, too, to do the same." Kieran nodded, but a frown crept over her features. The services Marky suggested were all well and good, but Mam didn't have enough need for sewing or woolens to make up the rental cost for the apartment. "What do people give you in exchange?" Marky shrugged. "Little bits of everything, whatever I ask for." "Foodstuffs?" A nod. "That and more. What's your mam need?" "Little bits of everything," Kieran said, nodding in agreement. "Can the kids be trusted to run errands?" "You want to put them to work too?" Marky asked with a chuckle. Kieran shrugged. "We'll need to sooner or later." With a sigh, Marky said, "They will. And yes, they can be trusted. They've got too much energy to stay in these halls much longer. Running them will do them good." Kieran finally ducked past the children and stood in front of Marky. She spat in her right hand and offered it to Marky. "Mam will want real paper tomorrow, but this'll do for now." Marky nodded, spat in her palm, and shook Kieran's hand. "Jody'll come and help you move tomorrow then." "Not you?" Marky asked, cocking her head to the side. Kieran cursed herself mentally. She normally helped her middle sister move new tenants in, but if her meeting with Anvation went as she hoped it would, she'd be done with working for Mam. But Marky and everyone in the Undercity knew how Mam operated. This perceived change would fan rumors into flames, and the flames would reach Mam before Kieran and Jody got home. Yeah, me too," Kieran finally said, forcing a smile. I'll see you tomorrow." Marky shook her head and spoke softly. "No, you won't. You've got that faraway look in your eyes, Kieran. You're going, ain't you?" Kieran crouched in front of Marky. "You gotta keep it quiet till tomorrow, Marky." She scrambled for an offer. "You keep it quiet. I'll make sure Mam keeps my apartment vacant for the kids. Deal?" Marky nodded. "Deal. Get on then, girl. Go make us proud." Kieran ran the entire way to the Anvation office that the company maintained in the Undercity. No one remained in the line for appointments, as it was too late in the day for that. But the door was closed, the curtains drawn across the small window, and someone was inside with the recruiter. Kieran paced outside the door, checking the large clock in the center of the Undercity. She couldn't linger here long if she were to meet Jody back at the lighthouse ruins in less than an hour. She carefully considered all the possible shortcuts she could take, as well as their pitfalls. At best, she could make it to the lighthouse in 22 minutes, if she ran most of the way. The clock continued to tick rhythmically, no matter how hard she willed it to slow. Footfalls alerted her to an approaching pedestrian, and she scanned the nooks and crannies nearby for a place to hide herself. If the person was someone she knew, word could get back to Mam far faster than Jody's rickety wagon could travel. Jody looked around nervously as she approached the Anvation office. She had left her wagon somewhere else, or Kieran would have known it was her sister long before Jody arrived. Walking up to the door, Jody hesitated, her hand outstretched as if to knock. Jody, Kieran hissed from the shadows. What are you doing here? Jody started, rolled around, and spotted Kieran. Me? What are you doing here? I asked you first. With a shrug, Jody said, none of your business. None of my business, Kieran asked. What about Ma'am? Is it any of Ma'am's business? Jody took a step toward Kieran, her hands flying up as if to grab Kieran's arm. Kieran stepped back, evading her sister's grasp. I'm going to take that as a no. Jody dropped her hands to her sides and smirked. Fine. If you tell Ma'am I was here, then I'll have to tell her how you know that. And then there'll be questions for you too. You might not answer me, but you'll have to answer Ma'am. You would too, Kieran said. Then let's keep this between us. Only if you tell me why you're here. Jody crossed her arms over her chest and stared at Kieran, but she said nothing more. Kieran clenched her jaw. There was no question in her mind that her sister was here for the same reason she was, to get off planet. Kieran knew that Innovation didn't have many positions left for the first wave of colonists, and what were the odds that they'd hire 2 sisters to leave Earth? It wouldn't matter that they still had a sister at home. The scientists would expect that Ma'am couldn't give up the majority of her children on a mission from which they wouldn't return. Kieran's gaze slid from her sister to the clock, then to the office door. Even if the recruiter finished talking to whoever was inside, there was no way Kieran could talk to him with Jody here. She'd have to come back tomorrow to help Marky and her family move. If she timed things right, she could slip away to the Innovation office in the inevitable chaos of such an endeavor. And if she couldn't do that, at least she could ensure that Jody didn't get back here before she did. All right, well, then let's go home. Where's your wagon? At the lighthouse ruins, Jody replied, eyeing Kieran warily. You get rid of everything? Jody nodded. Yes, Ma'am will be happy. What about you? Did you find her a renter? Marky and her grandkids. It'll be cramped, but they'll make do. Great, Jody said, though her tone indicated that it was anything but. Kieran and Jody didn't speak the entire way home, nor at dinner. Instead, they glared at each other intermittently, looking away whenever the other seemed to notice. When either of them wanted a dish, they asked Shyama to pass it. Their youngest sister was too amenable to complain when she was asked. After dinner, both Kieran and Jody returned to their apartments. Jody had shot one more baleful glare in Kieran's direction before she hauled her door open and went inside. Kieran slammed her door shut in response, then flopped onto her mattress. She had no illusions that she was particularly skilled at much else other than keeping names and faces straight in her head. She knew everyone in the complex and a large swath of people in the Undercity, and she remembered the most trivial things about them. It made her a good negotiator when it came to renting out apartments in the complex. Jody, on the other hand, was friendly and well-liked. She had a natural charm and grace that Kieran lacked. If it came to a competition between the two of them in terms of who would make the better colonist, Kieran was sure that Jody would win, hands down. No longer did Kieran's tiny apartment remind her of a space capsule. Now it felt like a prison, the only 4 walls she would ever know. She rose and began pacing, though she couldn't get more than a few steps in any direction before the confines of the space forced her to turn around. Just like a prison, and Jody was leaving her to rot in it. Her pacing brought her back over and over again to a cluster of drawings stuck to the wall with tape, used chewing gum, and whatever else she'd found to hold things up. In the center was one Jody had drawn when they were younger. Though the people in the drawing were stick figures, Jody had thoughtfully labeled each one. Jody, Shyama, and Ma'am stood near the bottom, waving, while Kieran clung to the side of a cartoonish rocket ship, gouts of flame pouring from the back end, while the tip was pointed at a red circle labeled as Mars. Kieran reached out for the picture, ready to crumple it up and throw it away, but she froze, her fingertips inches from the paper. She recalled what Jody had said when she gave the drawing to Kieran. I could never leave Ma'am and Shyama behind, but I hope that someday we all get to be somewhere better. You'll find us somewhere better. Kieran carefully took the picture down and tucked it under her arm. She didn't bother with her shoes. Ma'am could complain all she wanted. It was easier to go across the level without them. She grabbed the horizontal bar above her door, which ran the length of this level of apartments, making her way to Jody's door and pounding on it. What? Jody shouted. Her voice quavered like she'd been crying. I want to talk, Kieran replied. Well, I don't. Kieran folded the picture in half and slid it through the gap between Jody's door and the wall beside it. It blocked a portion of the sliver of light coming from Jody's apartment, and then the light shone through that space again. Silence persisted for a full minute before Jody sniffled loudly and opened her door. Her face was pink and puffy, though the dampness at her collar looked more like she had splashed her face with cool water than as though her tears had made it all the way to her shirt. You kept this? Jody asked. Kieran nodded. Can I come in? Jody stepped back from her door, giving Kieran room to slip inside. Where Kieran's apartment was largely sparse and undecorated, except for her cluster of drawings, Jody had collected all sorts of knickknacks and festooned her walls with them, creating a riot of color that gleamed even in the faint lamplight. I can't believe you still have this, Jody said, sitting on the edge of her mattress, running her fingers over the stick figures. It's so awful. Do you remember what you told me when you drew it? Kieran asked. Jody scoffed. Something about staying with Mam and Shyama forever. I remember it differently, Kieran said. I remember you wanting us all to be together, but knowing that someone had to go ahead first. Yeah, that would be the way you remember it, Jody said. It gets you out of here. This is about Anveshan, isn't it? Kieran nodded. I'm worried that they'll only take one of us. Not enough jobs to go around. And I didn't think you wanted to go. I also don't want to die here. I want Anveshan to get us all out of here. Me too, but they won't take both of us. Kieran blew out a long breath, which came out more like a sigh than she'd hoped. They'll probably hire you first. They've got plenty of jobs, Kier, Jody said, not just many more slots in the Mars program. With a frown, Kieran said, I didn't think they'd announced the location for the colony. Where did you hear that? I've been talking to the recruiter about working as an interviewer, picking the people who get to go, like you. Me? Really? Kieran asked. But why? Because you're the right kind of person for morale in a colony. You'll get to know the little details about all the other people before the ship even takes off. Everyone will like you and trust you and confide in you. They'll probably elect you mayor or whatever they're going to have. Kieran frowned. No, nobody likes me. I'm too brusque, Mam says. Jody rolled her eyes. Yes, you are. But people would much rather be around you than me. I just went out of the complex, out from under Mam's thumb. But you're the one with big dreams, and you've got the personality to accomplish it, Kier. She smiled sheepishly. We're not in competition this time. Kieran regarded Jody, considering how Mam could get by if two of her daughters left the complex. She was the eldest, and Mam expected that Kieran would one day take over the complex. But that wasn't what Kieran wanted, and she knew it. The complex might be home, but it wouldn't last forever, especially as the planet fell apart around them. Getting off Earth was the only hope that any of them had. We work together? Kieran asked. You here and me out there? That seems like the best plan, though I can only imagine what Mam's going to say. Kieran took a deep breath, a smile spreading across her face. For the first time in many years, she felt like she finally understood her younger sister. Jody was well-liked for a reason. She really cared about other people, including Kieran, and including Mam. She'll get by. Marky's grandchildren can take over our jobs, and then they won't all have to cram in with Marky on the ground floor. They can have our old places. Her tone took on a bit of teasing. You sure you're ready to give up being Mam's favorite? Jody chuckled. Even if we saved humanity, she'll still find some fault in us. At least we can be in it together.
Thank you, Dawn. That was delightful. You know, it's funny. On the face of it, these two stories look so different, and yet they're both about finding the right place.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. I love the way there can be resonance in two stories when the genres are so different and there's no conscious decision to align them with one another. That's really neat.
Mm-hmm.
Well, those were both wonderful. Thank you so much, A.T. Greenblatt and Dawn Vogel, for joining us today and gracing us with your stories. Thank you, Daniel Marcus, my co-host, for bringing us all here. And everyone who came to listen, thank you. Thank you for joining us to stay together, as Daniel says, spinning the fictive dream. This is Story Hour. Good night.
Night, folks.